If you've ever wondered what happens when medieval cosplay, New Age mysticism and champagne-soaked egos collide, well, allow me to introduce you to the Order of the Solar Temple. This wasn't your average basement-dwelling doomsday cult. No, these were people who looked like they belonged in glossy magazine ads for luxury watches. Business executives. Doctors. Olympians. Mayors of small Canadian towns. They didn't meet in dingy warehouses with flickering fluorescent lights. No, they rented alpine chalets. They wore silk robes. They drank actual champagne after their mystical ceremonies. And they thought that by dying in the right way, they could hitch a cosmic Uber to the dog star Sirius. And they died. In ways so theatrical, so overstaged, you almost expect the credits rolling, revealing this as a film student's art project. By the time the fires, bullets, and poisonings were done, 74 people were dead, including children. But that's skipping ahead. A neo-Templar fantasy, the Order of the Solar Temple, began in 1984 officially. Unofficially, it was the product of decades, maybe centuries, of people recycling the same romantic myth that the medieval Knights Templar didn't actually vanish in the early 1300s after King Philip IV and Pope Clement accused them of heresy, fraud, and sodomy, then enthusiastically set them on fire. No, the faithful claim they went underground, safeguarding secret spiritual knowledge, priceless treasures, and some sort of cosmic destiny that naturally they'd share only with a select elite few. Our founding duo bought this fantasy wholesale. On one side, Joseph de Mambro, born in Pont-Saint-Esprit, France in 1924, a man whose early resume boasted such illustrious entries as jeweler and homeopathic quack. By the 1950s, he had joined the Rosicrucian order. The Rosicrucians were concerned with self-control and reincarnation, and are believed to have existed in secret for hundreds of years. De Mambro stayed in various mystical groups until the late 60s, when he decided he'd learned enough to be the one running the show. He dabbled in the neo-Templar revival circles of Jacques Brier, a French esotericist obsessed with the idea of traveling between the earthly plane and eternal existence. By the 1970s, de Mambro had a spiritual center in Geneva, the Golden Way, where followers were encouraged to renounce their possessions, which conveniently ended up paying for de Mambro's very comfortable home. Enter the charmer. Then there was Luc Jouret. If de Mambro was the controlling puppet master, Jouret was the charming frontman. Born in the Belgian Congo in 1947, Jouret trained as a medical doctor, but took a sharp turn into alternative medicine after a spiritual awakening in the Philippines. By the early 80s, he was a rising star in the renewed Order of the Temple, another neo-Templar group founded by Raymond Bernard, also a former Rosicrucian. Jouret was tall, fit, charismatic, the kind of guy who could stand in front of a corporate audience and convince them that macrobiotic diets and cosmic vibrations would both improve productivity and save their souls. And he did just that. In fact, Hydro-Quebec, the public Canadian electric company, once paid him to give employee motivation talks. He walked out of those gigs with not just a paycheck, but new cult recruits. The merger around 1983, Jouret and de Mambro crossed paths. The older man immediately recognized what he was lacking, someone with movie star charm to front his operation. Jouret became the Order's recruiter and public face, while de Mambro stayed in the shadows as the cosmic master, claiming connections to a mysterious Mother Lodge in Zurich consisting of 33 senior masters, names that were likely entirely fictitious. By 1984, they launched the Order of the Solar Temple. At its height, it had about 500 members, mostly well-off, well-educated French-speaking Catholics from Europe, Canada, and Martinique. Recruitment followed a neat pyramid. Public lectures funneled people into social clubs, the Amanta or Arcadia, and from there, the chosen few advanced into the International Chivalric Organization of the Solar Tradition. There, the real secret teachings were revealed, along with requests for large financial contributions. The beliefs. Now, if you were lucky enough, or gullible enough, to make it to the inner circle, here's what you'd learn. The world was ending soon enough that you should probably get your affairs in order and pick out a nice ceremonial robe. The ozone layer was disintegrating. The AIDS epidemic was a sign of spiritual decay. Ethnic conflicts were boiling over. This wasn't random chaos, it was the final act. And those who had awakened to the Solar Temple's teachings had a way out. Transit. Transit meant dying, ideally in a group, in such a way that your soul would ascend to Sirius, the dog star, where you'd live on as a being of light. Of course, your presence at any of these lectures or ceremonies was not an accident. No, you'd been reincarnated specifically to join the Order. You were a noble traveler through time and space. And conveniently, the only way to fulfill your destiny was to keep giving your money and loyalty to Jouret and Mambro. The theater of the absurd. The rituals were a mixture of Bible studies, New Age teachings, and amateur theater. Members were told to meditate on light particles flowing through their bodies. They recited from the Gospel of John and the works of Theosophist Alice Bailey. Sometimes they were told to put plastic bags over their heads, not as a death ritual, but as a symbolic separation from nature. And sometimes they were drugged. A little something slipped into soup or coffee to help them loosen up enough to hand over assets or participate in activities their sober selves might object to. And Mambro loved his special effects. Lights, holograms, hidden buttons that could swing open a door just as his cosmic daughter commanded it. By the late 1980s, the cult had wealth, prestige, and an intoxicating sense of elitism. But like all great tragedies, or comedies depending on your level of cynicism, the cracks were already forming. Apparently, silk robe ceremonies and champagne weren't enough to weather ozone collapse and nuclear Armageddon. The solution? An organic farm in the middle of nowhere. About a dozen devoted Europeans followed Jouret and Mambro to the Canadian province of Quebec, settling on land that had once been a Catholic monastery in Sainte-Anne-de-la-Pérade. It was a quiet little town of 2,000 people, best known for ice fishing, not cosmic ascension. The cult rebranded it as their rural ark, the place to bunker down until the rest of humanity either self-destructed or was mercifully vaporized by divine intervention. One critic, Rosemarie Klaus, who later became a vocal anti-cult activist, claimed her husband gave the Order $500,000 to get the farm running. Which is impressive, because even the most optimistic farmer would struggle to spend that much on carrots and compost. The apocalypse business model in Quebec, Jouret leaned harder into his apocalyptic preaching. Between environmental collapse and nuclear doom, there was no point in thinking long-term, except of course in how much you could give to the Order before that inevitable transit. Meanwhile, Mambro was still playing the role of cosmic CEO. He decided who could marry, who could have children, and what those children would be named. The Order's finances were booming. Wealthy members were donating millions of Swiss francs. Real estate holdings were stacking up. Mountain chalets, beachfront villas, and a mansion in Geneva for Mambro himself. Which was awkward, given that he constantly preached the virtues of spiritual detachment from material possessions. Apparently that detachment didn't apply to red Ferraris or Lamborghinis. The son who knew too much, then came the first real fracture. In 1990, Elie, the son of Joseph Mambro, boldly pointed out that his father's so-called supernatural abilities were more about clever marketing than genuine mysticism. He discovered that the Order's miracles, glowing apparitions, sacred voices, moving objects, were just lights, sound effects, and hidden switches. Elie went public with his accusations, and about 15 members left with him. Once exposed, the cult's leadership claimed these illusions were used to inspire less enlightened members. This betrayal gnawed at Mambro. His cosmic image was cracking, and cracks in cult leadership rarely end in therapy sessions. More often they end in blood. The Antichrist baby. In 1994, the paranoia hit a fever pitch with the birth of a baby boy in Canada, Emmanuel Dutoit. His parents, Tony and Nikki Dutoit, were once loyal members. Tony had even been the lighting designer for Mambro's rituals, but they'd fallen out with the leadership. They dared to name their son Emmanuel, the same name as Mambro's so-called cosmic daughter, who according to him had been conceived by gods in Israel. This was a cosmic branding violation, and Mambro declared the baby to be the Antichrist.
not metaphorically, literally. His solution: the child and the parents had to die. On the night of September 30th, 1994, two loyal cultists in Canada invited the Dutoits over for dinner. Instead of dessert, they got an ambush. Tony was beaten, stabbed 50 times, and had his throat slit. Nicky was stabbed multiple times in the back, throat, and chest. And baby Emmanuel, only 3 months old, was stabbed in the chest 20 times, his blood drained before he was hidden behind a water heater. The killers then calmly left the scene, drove the Dutois car to the airport, and flew back to Switzerland. The hosts, Jerry and Colette Genoux, cleaned up the mess and 3 days later killed themselves. It was the first domino in a series of staged, gruesome exits that the Order would soon call transits. From cult drama to international crime scene. A few days later, Quebec police began piecing together what happened. But by then, the rest of the Order was already in motion. In Switzerland, members gathered in chalets, their rituals becoming final rehearsals. Some believed the transit would be a glorious, voluntary passage to Sirius. Others weren't told the fine print until the drugs kicked in. This wasn't Jonestown in the jungle, where an entire community lived together. Most members had normal jobs and homes, which made the sudden, synchronized wave of deaths all the more shocking. Inside those alpine chalets were stockpiles of gasoline, propane tanks, plastic bags, and enough ceremonial robes to outfit a low-budget medieval epic. Letters had been mailed out to newspapers, scholars, and government officials. Grand, flowery farewells full of cosmic promises. May our love and peace accompany you during the terrible tests of the apocalypse that await you. From where we will be, we will always hold our arms open to receive those who are worthy of joining us. Translation: we'll be dead soon. The events that followed would be the cult's final, fiery performance, an orgy of murder, suicide, and arson that left investigators sifting through ashes, bullet casings, and melted ceremonial jewelry. October 4th, 1994. In the quiet Swiss farming village of Cherry, population about 275, late-night locals spotted an orange glow flickering on the horizon. It wasn't the cozy glow of a hearth, it was the unmistakable hungry light of a building on fire. The volunteer fire brigade arrived quickly. They put out the flames in a rural farmhouse and found in the bed the body of the owner, Albert Giacobino. Giacobino had a plastic bag cinched over his head. Odd enough, but beneath the bag, a bullet hole and no gun. Inside the house, investigators found propane tanks, jugs of gasoline, and incendiary devices, all set to burn the place down. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted death. They wanted spectacle. The hidden rooms. While searching, police discovered the garage had been converted into a chapel. This wasn't your standard Swiss mountain town prayer room. This was cult decor, red fabrics, ceremonial objects, and briefcases stuffed with ideological manifestos. And then came the real horror, a hidden trapdoor. Below, in a chamber lined with gasoline canisters, they found 18 bodies arranged like human offerings. The corpses, dressed in red, black, white, and gold robes to denote their rank, were laid out in a star formation before a painting of Christ with a rose above his head. Each one had a plastic bag over their head. Each one had been drugged, and many had bullet wounds. Some had defensive wounds, which meant they hadn't volunteered for the privilege of transit. The only sound in that room came from a cassette player, still running, a voice droning about astrology and cosmic cycles. A bizarre soundtrack for a crime scene. Granges-sur-Salvan. The second stage, 60 miles away, another Swiss town, Granges-sur-Salvan, was lighting up the night sky. 3 chalets burned. The death toll, 25, many so badly charred they had to be identified by dental records. 5 of the dead were children, the youngest just 4 years old. In one room, a little boy was found embracing a girl in a red dress. Investigators said she seemed to be almost smiling. Among the adult dead were Robert Ostigui, the mayor of Richelieu, Quebec, and Jocelyn Grandmaison, a senior reporter for Le Journal de Québec. The cult's recruiting net had reached from Alpine Switzerland to small-town Canadian politics and media, and pulled them all into the same fiery end. Across the Atlantic in Morin Heights, Quebec, a fire consumed a lodge owned by Jerry and Colette Genoux, the same couple who had hosted the Dutoits' Last Supper. Inside, firefighters found the Genouds dead. Their deaths ruled suicides. 2 days later, police searching the remains found something else. A storage closet stuffed with the bodies of Tony, Nikki, and baby Emmanuel Dutoit. Tony's medallion read T.S. Temple Solaire. The leaders among the dead. At first, Swiss and Canadian authorities thought the leaders had escaped. Arrest warrants went out for Joseph de Mambro and Luc Jouret. Perhaps they'd taken the cult's considerable fortune and vanished. But among the blackened remains in Switzerland, investigators eventually identified both men. De Mambro, the puppet master. Jouret, the salesman. Dead alongside their followers, consumed by the same fires they'd planned. The letters they left behind insisted it was all voluntary. We died in joy and plenitude. But the forensic reality told another story. Out of 53 deaths in Switzerland, only about 15 were willing suicides. The rest had been drugged, shot, or outright murdered. This was less a mass suicide than a mass execution, an apocalypse delivered on schedule. The star motif, one detail stuck in the public imagination, the star-shaped arrangements of the bodies. It was meant to symbolize the Order's connection to Sirius, the dog star, the celestial home awaiting them. In practice, it was both surreal and grotesque. Dozens of drugged or dead people posed like human points on a cosmic diagram, waiting for fire to erase their features. And this, as horrifying as it was not the end. The transits would happen again. The October 1994 transit was supposed to be the grand finale, the curtain call on de Mambro's cosmic drama. But as with many cults, even when the head is cut off, the body keeps twitching. The French Alps, December 1995. 14 months after the first mass deaths, a forest in the Vercors region of the French Alps began to reek of smoke and gasoline. Hunters stumbled across abandoned cars. Police sent a helicopter to search the area, and from above they saw it, 16 charred bodies, carefully arranged in that same star formation. Among the dead were 3 children. Autopsies revealed the pattern was unchanged from the earlier massacres: sedatives, asphyxiation, bullet wounds, and then fire. The date was no accident. It was almost certainly timed to the winter solstice. Letters found at the site spoke of seeing another world and described the deaths as a voluntary departure. Investigators disagreed. Most of the dead had been incapacitated before being killed. It was like watching a sequel nobody had asked for. Same plot, same choreography, same ending, minus the original director. The St. Casimir tragedy, March 1997. Then came the final known transit. In the small Canadian town of St. Casimir, Quebec, Didier Quez lived with his wife, Chantal Goupilot, their 3 teenage children, another couple, and an elderly woman. Quez was an admitted cult member, but he told the media the group had disbanded after 1994, which, as it turned out, was only partly true. In March 1997, the adults began debating the end. The teenagers, ages 13, 14, and 16, wanted nothing to do with it. That was inconvenient. For days, propane tanks were switched on and off inside the home. Sedatives were administered. The 5 adults, Quez, his wife, the elderly woman, and the other couple, died in a blaze, their bodies once again positioned in the familiar star pattern. The 3 teenagers? They woke up in a shed behind the house, groggy from the drugs but alive. Snow covered the roof. They'd been left outside to sleep while the others died inside. Why they lived. Canadian prosecutors believe the teens may have started the fire after realizing what was happening, or they may have simply been spared as unwilling participants. Either way, they were not charged. Prosecutor Mario Tremblay told the court that no jury would hold them responsible. The teenagers were eventually sent to live with relatives in France, leaving behind the ashes of their former life, quite literally. The final tally by the end of 1997, the death count stood at 74. That's 74 people who believed, or were convinced, that death was their only ticket to cosmic salvation. And yet, authorities believed other members were still out there. In 1998, police in the Canary Islands claimed to have stopped a mass suicide plot by an alleged Solar Temple group. It turned out to be a false alarm, a different cult, same apocalyptic ambition. But the sense of dread lingered. After all, the Order had shown they could stage synchronized mass killings across multiple countries and years. If they wanted to try again, who could say they wouldn't succeed? When the fires went out and the smoke finally cleared, what remained wasn't enlightenment, wasn't ascension, and certainly wasn't Sirius. It was chaos. Investigators on 2 continents were left with a grisly puzzle. Was this mass suicide? Or, as some whispered in darker corners, the cleanup phase of an international money laundering and arms trafficking operation wrapped in mystical window dressing? The media-feeding frenzy European tabloids went into overdrive. The imagery was irresistible. Silk-robed corpses in star patterns, alpine chalets ablaze, whispers of medieval knights and cosmic voyages. It was the Da Vinci Code meets helter-skelter, with just enough astrology to keep the horoscope readers interested. Highbrow outlets joined in, framing it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of new religious movements. But the tone often blurred the line between legitimate concern and sensationalism. A French television station actually aired a segment called Knights of the Apocalypse. Subtlety was never in fashion. For years, well into the 2000s, French and Swiss media kept the story alive, alternating between investigative exposés and lurid anniversary specials. The Lone Trial. With Mambro and Jouret already cremated by their own devices, there wasn't exactly a long list of defendants to prosecute. In fact, only one man ever faced trial for the deaths, Michel Tabachnik, a renowned Franco-Swiss orchestra conductor, and according to prosecutors, the Order's intellectual cheerleader. Tabachnik had attended 2 key meetings in 1994, right before the first mass deaths. The state argued that his esoteric writings and speeches reinforced the cult's belief in its elite status and cosmic mission, paving the way for transit. Witnesses claimed he was Mambro's crown prince, the man groomed to take over if the leader ever stepped aside or stepped into a bonfire. Tabachnik denied everything. He said he'd been manipulated like everyone else, a victim rather than a conspirator. The trial drew huge crowds. With 50 witnesses and many victims' families in attendance, they had to move the proceedings to a former museum. The stakes were high. Conviction could mean up to 10 years in prison. And then, not guilty. The acquittal was appealed, but in 2006 the appellate court upheld it. Tabachnik walked away, baton still in hand, resuming his career conducting orchestras around the world. France declares war on cults. If French courts couldn't put Solar Temple survivors behind bars, French politicians decided they could at least make life harder for the next Mambro. In June 2000, the National Assembly passed a bill banning sectes, cults, outright. Justice Minister Elizabeth Guigou praised it as a significant advance for democracy. The international human rights community called it draconian. The law fizzled out before full implementation. But in 2001, France came back with a subtler, more enforceable weapon, a law introducing the concept of abus de faiblesse, abuse of weakness, into the criminal code. It allowed prosecutors to go after cult leaders who exploited followers through fraud, coercion, sexual abuse, promotion of suicide, or good old-fashioned brainwashing. Convictions could mean 5 years in prison and fines up to $750,000. Even before that, France already had an anti-cult agency, MILS, which kept a bad list of 200 groups, from the Order of the Solar Temple to Jehovah's Witnesses. In 2002, MILS was replaced by Miviludes, a rebranded watchdog that claimed to focus on sectarian deviations rather than religion itself. They still kept files. They still sent undercover operatives to cult meetings. They just wrapped it in friendlier language. The moral panic machine. Sociologists James T. Richardson and Massimo Introvigna later described the post-Solar Temple climate as a textbook moral panic, a fear out of proportion to the actual threat. fueled by recycled statistics and political grandstanding. But panic, however inflated, has its uses. The Order of the Solar Temple became the go-to bogeyman for legislators, journalists, and parents groups. By the early 2000s, the fires had gone out, the court cases were over, and most of the surviving members had either disappeared into quiet anonymity or reinvented themselves in more socially acceptable spiritual circles. But the Order of the Solar Temple didn't just vanish. It seeped into pop culture, deep plot myths, and a particular strain of French-speaking UFO lore like cigarette smoke clinging to a velvet curtain. The intrigue magnet. The Order's story was irresistible to those drawn to intrigue. The mass deaths weren't suicides, they argued. They were murders. The banking and real estate holdings, at least 60 properties across 3 continents, fueled theories of massive money laundering. The $93 million Australian bank deposit that surfaced during investigations became Exhibit A in the follow the money narrative. And then there was the fact that a handful of members were high-profile professionals, mayors, journalists, even athletes. If you squinted hard enough, you could weave that into a global elite death cult. Tourism at the end of the world. While the cult itself disbanded, or at least stopped arranging bodies in star shapes, its apocalyptic DNA lived on. In 2011, the French anti-cult agency Miviludes sent its chairman, Georges Fenech, to the mountain village of Bouguereau in southwestern France. A wave of spiritual seekers had decided that when the Mayan calendar ended on December 21, 2012, Bouguereau's upside-down mountain would be the only safe place on Earth. Rumors claimed there was a spaceship hidden inside the peak, ready to whisk the chosen few to safety. Fenech came to warn locals about the horror of the dramas which cults have caused in recent years. By December 2012, Bouguereau was flooded with reporters, pilgrims, and half-naked bell ringers climbing the mountain. The authorities eventually had to block access. From Sirius to self-help, some former members drifted into other New Age movements, less robe-burning, more yoga retreats. Others kept quiet, perhaps wary of being recognized as alumni of one of the most infamous cults in modern history. The ideas, though, never completely died. The blend of medieval pageantry, New Age mysticism, environmental doomsaying, and UFO salvation has proved surprisingly durable. You can find echoes of it in smaller groups today. They just tend to be smarter about fire safety and media exposure. In the end, the Order of the Solar Temple was a contradiction wrapped in silk robes. It was both high society and gutter brutality, cosmic aspirations and cheap stage magic. It promised salvation but delivered execution. And maybe that's why it still fascinates, because it's the perfect storm of human vanity, greed, and belief. Here was a group of educated, wealthy adults, people who should have been the last to hand over their autonomy, willingly surrendering to a narrative where death wasn't just inevitable, it was the goal. All it took was the right mixture of flattery, fear, and cosmic promises, plus a couple of Ferraris for the guy in charge. If the original Knights Templar died by fire at the stake, the neo-Templars of the Solar Temple took it one step further. They lit the match themselves. And in doing so, they left behind a story so bizarre, so grotesque, and so darkly theatrical that even now, decades later, it's hard to tell where the tragedy ends and the absurdity begins. If you enjoyed diving deep into the unknown with us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what secrets we uncover next. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and until next time, keep questioning everything.